as you all know from the beginning of this call, when Peter Margolis sort of shared the beginning of the network and how quality improvement is our foundation, it was very hard to imagine that someday we would become a network that was pretty deeply engaged in research. But here we are 10 years in a place where we are now launching several major research projects, several of which you're going to hear about during the next hour. But even more importantly, and I think more novel, we're engaging in these research projects in very close partnership with patients and families. So David Wohl, who is a member of our parent working group and who leads the parent working group research subcommittee, among several other hats in the network, I'm going to ask him to introduce himself, just remind us how long he's been in the network and which care center he's affiliated with. But he is going to talk to us about the very important role that patients and parents have in co-producing research in ImproveCareNow. So thanks so much, David. I'll let you take over from here, and I'll move your slides as you tell me to.
Great, thank you, Sarah, and thanks for everyone for being on this call today. I think this is just an amazing opportunity for us all to get together and learn from one another, and that's sort of the theme of what I'll be talking about. So I've been involved in the network for, I'd say about 4 years. I'm the parent of now, yesterday, a 13-year-old boy who has had Crohn's disease since at least 5 years of age. And we are at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill and work with a great team of people here who got us involved in ICN. Can I move to my first slide? Great. So what Sarah asked me to talk about, and I think is completely appropriate, is co-producing research. We hear a lot about co-production. During the talks today, you've heard people talk about parents and patients and their involvement, and it even extends to research, and this is pretty unique. I'm a researcher professionally and can tell you that there really are limits in medicine and in research in general for involving stakeholders. And we'll go through some of the experiences that people have had in trying to involve people who are affected by the research. But really, I think you're going to have a hard time finding an example of an organization that has gone as far as ICN has to really be inclusive in every aspect of its operations and its mission of involving those people who really are living and experiencing IBD on a daily basis. So I'm going to talk about going from a generation of an idea to really getting a result and then disseminating that result. And this is Sarah's model for how to frame this, and I think it works really appropriately. So let's move on to the next slide. So what are we really meaning when we say co-production? It's one of those terms like self-management that may be a little bit hard to define or define clearly for everyone. Everyone may think they understand it, but have different definitions. Next slide. So we know what coordination is, and there's a lot of coordination. Coordination, of course, is helping move things, make things work together in a way to get to a predetermined outcome or a whole. Next slide. There's also cooperation. People working together. I give you this, you give me that, you receive my help, you offer help. And in ICN, we certainly have lots of coordination because we have very organized people. And we have cooperation even. We work together. We're a cooperative network and organization. But next slide. There's also co-production, and that's very different. In co-production, what we're doing is together within one circle, we're trying to figure out how can we create something together that meets all of our needs. So it involves some coordination. It certainly involves cooperation, but it takes it to this next step where there's this combining of strengths to try to understand how can we best move forward to address our needs. Next slide. So in a traditional model of research, which involves coordination and even some cooperation, really everything comes down from the researchers. So it's like manna from heaven. That's why I put that picture there. We who are the affected, we who are the patients or the parents of patients, we wait until the researchers come up with these great ideas, do these fantastic studies that advance knowledge, and then we consume that, or we're the recipients of that. So researchers will propose some hypothesis, they'll design a study, they'll implement that study, And then they'll be responsible for spreading the word about their study, oftentimes either in some journal, and if it's significant enough, through the media, through a press release. Next slide. In a research co-production model, we change this. Instead of this being a recipient accepting this research from the researchers, we're talking about cooperating with researchers, stakeholders and researchers working together to achieve the aims, so that researchers and parents, and in this case even patients, can propose the hypotheses. It may be an idea that the researcher didn't necessarily have, but that the patient or parent had and brought to the researcher. The study design could be developed by the researcher and tweaked or modified based upon discussions and co-production with the parent or patient. Even leading the study, and this is really, really innovative, there could be opportunities where parents get involved and help in components of the research. And I think you'll hear about examples of that in some of the subsequent talks. And very importantly, and I think an area that really doesn't get as much attention as it should, is that stakeholders can play a huge role in disseminating findings. There are many good studies out there that have really important results that are collecting dust in journals that are on some library shelf, or buried, among the deluge of data that comes out every day from all sorts of research avenues. So if there's something that's really important to a community, parents, patients, stakeholders in general can spread that through the channels that they use to communicate. Nowadays, that can include Facebook groups. Hey, did you see this study? Hey, I was involved in this study. You should see what we found. And there's more and more ways that we can do this through structures that are created impressively by ICN, but also some that have spun off on their own as people get connected like they never have been before. So non-traditional ways of disseminating research so that the people who need to hear about the results get to hear about it. And so that's another way that I think parents and patients can play a big role in research. Next slide. So when we do this and we create this model, we have to understand that we're not just talking about sort of window dressing or even a little bit more than that with involving parents or engaging parents. Those are really important. That is part of this. But we're taking it another step. And in many fields, we do have patients, people who are living with the disease being studied, involved or engaged. Community advisory groups are an example. Study advisory groups where a large trial will have a group of parents or patients who can advise the study team, but they serve as advisors, and their words and their actions are really in that capacity, and they're not really having sort of a leadership role. So in this model, we're talking about having parents and patients really be active agents, playing a bigger role in all the elements of the study. This knowledge and experience is valued and is considered on par with the technical and scientific and clinical expertise that the researchers have. So it's complementary and valued just as much, not an afterthought or secondary. And that takes a big shift in this paradigm. And that all recognize that together we make a greater whole. And that's the co-production, mantra. That participation transforms how research is designed and delivered is the goal. That if it wasn't for the parent or patient involvement, the study would look different. So there's some impact, there's some lasting, lingering effect of having this cooperation occur. And then the co-production in this new model really has to be supported and encouraged by the network. This is not going to happen organically. We haven't seen it happen organically in other disease states, but we have a unique situation in this learning network that's been created, again, as Sarah said, with maybe a different purpose than for developing co-produced research, but a model that nonetheless can support research in a very, very different, innovative, and really exciting way. Next slide. Great. So you already get a sense of why we should do this. But let me make it really incredibly clear. So when we have co-produced research, it's not only just a feel-good, oh, look at us, we're a co-producing learning network, isn't this wonderful? It really does add value. And so the value added is that the relevance of the research is likely to be higher when you have affected communities involved. Because if you're proposing a study and it really falls flat on the people who it's intended to benefit, it tells you something. And I think that's really important. And I'll talk in a second about how parents and patients are having a bigger say in what research moves forward with the limited resources that are available within ICN. There's also alternative perspectives, as you can imagine. The way I see something as a parent and the way that the researcher sees something can be completely different. And we've even seen this when we try to align the priorities, the research priorities that we feel as a community within ICN should be pursued. When you look at the list from the parents and you look at a list from the researchers, while there's some overlap, there are some disparate elements where there's priorities that are higher for parents than it is for the researchers, and that's really important. There's also a practical role that parents and patients can play, and that's in developing recruitment and retention and advertising campaigns that are going to resonate with the affected target audience. And so I think that's invaluable, and that any researcher would want to have that, and it comes for free. We could troubleshoot thorny issues. There's a recruitment issue, or we find out that people are dropping out of the study too frequently. Parents and patients, again, can be involved in brainstorming about why this is happening, offer insights that really wouldn't be there, and that's hard to collect unless you had that involvement from the beginning. As we talked about, there's novel dissemination channels for information that comes out either about the study while it's recruiting or during the study and even afterwards. And lastly, and more encompassing, there's a strengthening of the relationships between the research and the patient-parent communities that occurs when you're working together, to generate new data that answers the questions that are most important and significant to those who have to live every day with IBD. Next slide. So to do this, though, takes work. And to do this, you really do have to have a culture. And I would say a culture that not only supports co-production, but really expects it. And without that expectation, I don't think it's going to happen. And that's why I think there was time carved out for this during this, webinar and also at our community conferences, because it is a big shift from the way that science has been done in the past and really is done in most other diseases, where people aren't sitting at a round table that includes parents and patients. That's not typically how it happens, and it can be difficult to shift things in a way that hasn't been done before, and where there's some sharing of power. That's always difficult for people. So I think that it's really a testament to the commitment that we see within ICN to extend this not only in the co-producing of quality care, but also in quality research. So ICN, for example, supports this, increasingly is expecting this, and is facilitating opportunities. So not just the talk, but the walk. In doing this, we have to be cognizant that there are these challenges, and we have to mitigate those. The intimidation on both sides. Sometimes providers sitting around a table can be very intimidated by having a parent there. And those of you who are providers know what that feels like. For us parents and patients, it could be very intimidating talking to people with white coats on around a table and trying to offer advice when we feel like maybe we don't have the background or the expertise. But we do have our experiences, and we do have the knowledge that we've gained through our own ups and downs of dealing with IBD. There has to be trust. We're trying to share something together. We're trying to develop something together, and a trusting relationship would have to be supported as well. And sometimes you have to be willing to hear things you don't want to hear. A researcher doesn't want to hear that their study idea really isn't so great or not that important, or hear that the way that you're approaching this, I don't think is really going to resonate or really get you what you want. So, there has to, and similarly, a parent has to hear, well, we understand why you're saying that, but, this is why it has to be done, because this is the most rigorous way to do the science. And I think, importantly for us in the affected community, most of us are not researchers. Most of us don't have a background in statistics and don't understand a lot about all the ins and outs of our clinical research program. For us, we're going to have to get up to speed. We quickly got up to speed about fecal calprotectin and about understanding vitamin D levels and understanding the difference between Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, we're increasingly having to get together to understand more about research. Next slide. So I think in this really nice model that I'm not going to go over, but I think is available for you to see, ICN has really encompassed and really embraced the spectrum of engagement here. And parent-patient used interchangeably here, from getting information, consulting, involving, collaborating, and leading. And when you go to the bottom row, how can you do this? Creating an open atmosphere, setting up focus groups, working groups, having parents be co-investigators and advisory board leaders, and then even having them be as co-principal investigators. We're moving right along the spectrum, and it's just incredibly exciting to watch this happen. I mean, and really, it's a model for other diseases, and I think that it's going to have a lasting impact well beyond IBD. Next slide. For example, the parent working group that you've heard about, we have a structure, and within that structure we have leadership from parents, and you're going to hear from both of them later on today. But we also have subcommittees, and one of our subcommittees is a research subcommittee of committed parents who really are interested in this, several of whom have no background in research whatsoever, which is fantastic. And this research group serves as a sounding board for researchers who have an idea or who have a study and it's already ongoing and they need more information. So at all parts of a study, at all elements of a study, across the entire spectrum of a study, this research group is available to advise and also co-produce if that's what is being asked. Next slide. In addition, we've worked hard to make sure that new research has parent and patient involvement. And to their credit, Steve Steiner and the rest of the people who run the research subcommittee, research steering committee that vets all new concept proposals, have agreed that any new concept has to include parents or patients or a good explanation for why they are not included. And to be clear here, we understand that there are sometimes people are interested in doing a retrospective analysis, they're looking at data. Even in those situations where you're not prospectively recruiting patients, there can be a role for a parent or patient. So I think that there's really few examples where a study wouldn't benefit. And by having this obligation, I think we're going to see more and more of the co-produced research that's going to make a difference. So it does sound a little bit like a mandate, but I think, as we've seen before, it's really important to have diversity. It's important to have good representation in research studies. I think this is one in the same theme of where it's really good to have a parent or patient involved in your research in some capacity. And we're going to ask people to really step up and think about that. And if there's a good reason not to, that's fine. But in most cases, we think that probably the research would benefit from this involvement. Next slide. To make that easier, we're working on portals. This is just a draft, an example, where researchers can easily find access to parents who are willing to work together with the researcher. And it may not be a parent from the research subcommittee of the parent working group, but we'll find one. So if you're interested in something that has to do with kids post-colectomy, we'll find somebody who is really interested in that and working with you. If it's about a specific diet, believe me, we'll find someone who could work with you about a specific diet. So I think that this is a resource that we're trying to make available and creating on-ramps to that resource. Next slide. So in a way, what we're talking about is matching. We want to match parents and patients with researchers so that you have a lovely, time together. And make sure that this is a beautiful experience for both of you and it's better and enriching for both of you. Next slide. So this is a different paradigm. It's a different model. We understand that. It's scary sometimes to do something new and different, but getting parents around the table, it starts with doing this at your sites. If you don't have a parent at your regular meetings, invite one. That leads to more and more interaction, and before you know it, you're thinking of ideas together and you say, that would be a good concept proposal, that's a great idea, maybe we should submit that to the ICN. And together, I think doing this, we really do a good service for ourselves. It certainly helps us as parents get involved. Many of us cope by being active, some withdraw, we are the opposite. And I think using us in this way helps us and hopefully will help you and ultimately help our kids. And that's what we're all about. So thanks for your attention. I'm willing to do whatever, Sarah, you want, questions or anything else you think would be appropriate.
Yeah, let's give it just a few seconds to see if anybody has questions. And I am just going to, while we're doing that, show the screen that you will all see on the ImproveCareNow website, where you can sign up to get updates about research proposals, opportunities, and results. So that, you know, as David said, the other sites he showed are still kind of, the other pages he showed are kind of a work in progress. This is actually there now, and we encourage all of you who want to stay apprised of research to go sign up. Any questions for David? Let's go ahead and give people just another couple of seconds to put one in the chat box. There are few people that speak about these issues as eloquently as David. I think, you know, we have so appreciated David's role as both a parent and researcher in this network, and I just want to sort of amplify and reemphasize one of the things he said, which is, you know, even if you feel like as a parent or patient you don't have experience in research, you don't understand all of the phases of a research study, that should not hold you back from getting involved, because again, as he showed us, and I think this imagery is just wonderful, going from this traditional model to the new model, there's a role in every stage of research projects, ranging from coming up with the ideas to spreading the findings on Facebook pages, through social circles you have in the IBD community. So there really is a way for everybody to get involved. So thank you so much, David, for spending the time with us tonight. I actually had a parent already put in the chat box they'd be interested in learning more about being part of the Parent Research Subcommittee, so we will connect you all after the call.
Absolutely. Thank you.